Good evening to everyone out there viewing us here from Words to Action. I'm sitting in for Dr. Ken Gordon. My name is Dr. Tamiko Smith, and our topic for this evening is about parenting. Are parents life builders or dream killers? We're going to explore the spectrum of parenting, looking at healthy parenting versus bad parenting. I have three special guests this evening that are from various professions that work with children's families across the state of New Jersey from different types of institutions, and they provide different types of services in working with parents. We want to see what are some of the do's and don'ts in reference to working with children and families and parenting styles, looking at what's an effective way to rear children, whether it's a single parent household to a two-parent family household, and also looking at the differences between parenting females versus males. Are there really any differences? Some people seem to think that females need a lot more attention, a lot more boundaries, where sometimes the males in the household tend to have more freeway and allowed to do certain things without curfews and lots of interventions. And sometimes we need to explore, what do our males feel like? Do they feel as though they need more attention from their parents as well? We're also going to look at some different types of parenting styles. Some of you may have never heard of lawnmower parenting versus helicopter parenting, and also looking at what constitutes families going off the deep end in reference to parenting, and looking at some of the abuse and abusive situations, and how effectively can we communicate with our children in the household in a positive way to rear positive children that engage in positive behaviors. So we're going to explore that today, and our first guest is Clara Hart, who has a lot of experience in working with children, families, and also teen parents. Welcome, Clara Hart. How are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Okay. We talk about, a lot of times we talk with parents, if parenting had a handbook of the do's and don'ts in reference to raising children. If there was such a thing called a handbook for parenting, what do you think would be some of the important content and also some of the content that may tell us what not to do?
I think one of the most important guidelines that needs to go into a parenting handbook is to make sure that you install respect, make sure that you install a moral belief system,
Okay.
and for you to have some type of belief in a higher power. I think that
Okay.
those are three very important guidelines that would go into a parenting handbook. I think that when we're talking about guidelines, that's just what they are. A parenting handbook would not fit for every situation.
Okay.
So parents need to understand that what may work for you may not work for my child.
Okay. And what would be a healthy type of parenting approach in working or rearing children in the household?
Well, I heard you talk about lawnmower versus authoritative, authoritarian. I think that there is a mixture, a
Okay.
good mixture, a good combination of all of those different types of parenting, including permissive.
Okay.
And what some people may think, oh, how dare you say abuse and neglect.
Okay.
There are many people who have been very successful in this world that have come from abusive situations.
Okay.
And we could, name a lot of, really
Okay.
talented people, Oprah Winfrey and,
Right.
Tyler Perry.
Okay.
They've come from situations that weren't 100% the run of the mill, but they're still very successful in their own right.
Okay. Do you think those particular situations that you just mentioned about the abusive parenting style and approach, that they also possibly had someone else in their household, another family member, that really demonstrated to them what nurturing and positive parenting was? Someone that role modeled something very different than what they were experiencing on a day-to-day.
Absolutely. I think that in life, what we do as we grow, we figure out as children what we're going to do in life different from what our parents have
Okay.
done. And somewhere along the line, you find good mentors.
Okay.
You find a support system. You find people who you want to be like,
Okay.
people that will help you to become successful in life. That is very important in order to become a productive person.
Do you feel that parenting styles are generational, meaning that we pass down from one generation to the next generation? For example, if my mother was a very nurturing type of individual and my father was a disciplinarian, do you think that in my parenting approach that I would possibly pick up some of those parenting styles as well? Or would they change? Or do you see in working with families and children that they're pretty much stagnant?
Well, my professional experience tells me that for the most part, parenting is generational.
Okay.
The difference comes in when you want to make a difference. No matter what type of parenting household you were raised in, there's something that you take away as an adult to say, I'm not going to be like my parents were in this area. But our basic moral and belief system comes from our foundation. It starts in the household. So generational, absolutely. And it's up to you to kind of break your cycles, your negative cycles, or it's up to you to embark on the positive parenting that you receive from your parents and push that, support that, mold it, guide it into your children as well.
Now, I know you work with young children across your professional career, and you also work with teenage populations, and some of those populations have children themselves.
Yes.
Kind of like we talk or refer to those populations sometimes as children raising children.
Absolutely.
And I remember a conversation that we had professionally, and a young lady was comfortable with spanking her young child. And I know some of the work that you were trying to do with her was trying to let her know what would be some positive interventions in response to dealing with or disciplining a child and not punishing the child. Can you talk about that a little bit and that experience when you had some of those conversations?
It's one of the barriers that I embark on as a professional in dealing with people who are raising children. Who am I? Who am I to tell this young lady that spanking her child is the wrong thing to do? It's not, there's no handbook. A lot of successful people have been spanked with hands, with belts, with whips, God only knows. And they have turned out to be productive. It becomes very difficult as a professional to tell someone that their belief system, what has shaped and molded them, is wrong. And you should not do that. But as a professional, you do have to help people find healthier ways to deal with behaviors, negative behaviors, especially when you're dealing with younger children. So it becomes it becomes a situation that I battle with. And what I try to understand is, what are you trying to accomplish when you hit your child? And if you hit your child, what are the rewards or consequences from that interaction with your child? I believe, effective communication, open communication is a healthier way to dealing with negative behaviors, even at small ages with children. Getting them to understand why they should not touch a hot stove opposed to letting them touch the hot stove so they'll never touch it again.
So you believe that teachable moments are important?
Absolutely.
When a child engages in negative behavior, redirecting that child with a conversation, open communication to say, how could you possibly have done this differently? And also that also helps when they get older to make better decisions.
Absolutely.
And also they know that they can come to you and talk to you as a parent. What I see a lot of times in working with children is that they go get information from their friends. First-hand information from their friends, their peers, and a lot of times, depending upon the age of the child they're getting that information from, that information is incorrect.
Absolutely.
So I always talk about when I work with parents that it's important to have that positive relationship because you want your child to come speak with you opposed to getting that information secondhand and possibly incorrect.
Well, that is why I stated that having a good mixture of all the different types of, except for the abuse and neglect, parenting style, but having a good mixture. Sometimes you may have to be that lawnmower parent when you say absolutely not no, and I'm just running over what you're trying to do because the answer is no. There are times when you need to fall back and be permissive and say, you know what, go right ahead. You go ahead and you do that. And whatever the consequences are, it becomes a learning or teachable moment for you and your child.
So what you kind of said earlier when we opened, you were saying it's best sometimes if parents have a mixture. They have the kind of communication that they can have with their child. They also have some discipline, not punishment. We don't use the term punishment anymore, but some type of discipline or teachable moment. And also sometimes you have to be permissive because you want your child to learn from their experience. And if you're an overprotective parent, they may not have the opportunity to engage in certain things.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sometimes you may need to hover.
Okay.
You might
Like
want
the
to
helicopter?
be like the helicopter parent.
Okay.
You might want to hover. You may want to, come and peek and know that I'm here, and you're looking around, and then you disappear. And then there's times where you may have to be authoritative.
Okay.
There are plenty of children who've been raised by professionals that are, whether they're in the military or in the armed forces, or, they're a police officer. And a lot of times those, not everyone, but a lot of times those individuals are more authoritative in their parenting style.
And sometimes authoritarian. They're very disciplined approach.
Absolutely. But if you can combine that with a little bit of the lawnmower and the helicopter and the permissive. If you can do a really good combination with your children, you'll be able to learn who your children are. I think it's really, really important to have that open communication.
What about the factor of spending more time with your child?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people believe that you should be there when your children are young, and I believe that you should be there when your children are, of the teenage era.
Okay.
I think if you cannot
some of
work,
the mystery behavior that teenagers engage in.
Right. I think that they need guidance. I think that they need you, at that time, because they do listen to a lot of what their friends are saying. And that is when, they want to be like their friends.
Absolutely.
They want to do and have and say and, do all the things that their friends are doing. But if you're there, you're able to coach, you're able to mold, you're able to guide them into a more positive direction at that point.
So you're saying in the teenage years, we always talk about the critical period where that peer development and my friends are everything. Sometimes forget about mom and dad or whoever the parents may be, that I can find whatever I need from my friends. And sometimes parents have a difficult time breaking through that barrier and also being the parent involved in a day-to-day activity and maybe having a relationship with the kids' friends as well, like you said earlier, so you have an idea of what they're doing from a day-to-day.
Absolutely.
I also wanted to go back a little bit and discuss, we talked about briefly the parenting maybe as a single family household versus a dual family parent household. And some of those differences that may come about. I was speaking with another one of my colleagues, and she's a single parent mother, and she felt the need to overcompensate for the absence of the other parent. Can you talk a little bit about that, perhaps?
I think that's a real situation. I think that you want the best for your children. Most people want the best for their children. So if there's an absent parent, a lot of times, the parent that is there will overcompensate for that. What you have to do is find a healthy combination, because you become the mom, the dad, or vice versa. You become the sister, the brother, possibly. So you have to have a really good balance on when you're in that situation. I think the most effective means of any parenting, whether you're in a two-parent household or in a single-parent household, is there to be involvement by both parents.
Absolutely.
I think the major difference in either household is if there is a lack of involvement, if there's an absent person. Because you can be in a two-parent household. You can be raised by your mother and father, but your father is always working. And so he's absent from your life. That working father needs to find a day to spend time with their children, to interact with their children, and it's vice versa for the working mom, or even in the single family household. The father or the mother needs to have a place in that child's life in order for there to be a productive outcome.
The level of involvement is very important.
Level of involvement is number one key in my opinion.
Absolutely. So when we talk about, I want to go back to the overcompensation statement. So when we overcompensate for something not being there or lack thereof or anything that you can provide, do you feel as though that may send a different message to the child that's on the receiving end, that we make allowances possibly for things that we wouldn't make allowances for because we're overcompensating for the lack of another person being there?
Yes. It's a fine line to cross. It's a fine line to cross. I think as parents, we do what we have to do to raise our children. And I think that in doing that, we cross lines. We overcompensate. I think that when you find yourself doing that, then you need to find a balance. You need to pull yourself back in. reach out into the community or your own social network. Talk to other people that are possibly in your situation or have come from your situation, and what did they do and how did they feel when, it was being done to them, or while they were doing it. And, get some help, get some support, get some guidance. Overcompensating in the negative. If you're just giving, then you're not installing, you're not providing you're not providing the foundation for a child to say, I have to work for something.
Okay.
And when people don't feel as though they need to work for things, they think that, they can take whatever they want, even if it's not theirs. And I'm not talking in the literal sense. I'm saying I can emotionally abuse you because your feelings are they're mine to do whatever I want with.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, a lot of times people who, kids that don't feel the need that, they have to earn things, they're just looking for handouts. They're saying, no, you need to give me this because I deserve to have it.
I want to talk a little bit about your background. You've worked with, like I said, youth from all different types of institutions, from teen parenting to substance abuse.
Yes.
And you work primarily with males with substance abuse and also with females. But what do you see some of the differences in reference to some of the reasons why they possibly chose to use drugs and alcohol? Do you see anything that there was a connection between the lack of parenting or the lack of involvement from parents in their upbringing? Or what were some of the things that you observed in working with those two populations?
The majority of the youth that I worked with in those situations came from backgrounds where their families were their parents were either absent from the home and or abusing and using drugs themselves.
Okay.
A lot of the teens that I worked with in those settings would use drugs with their parents,
Okay.
with their grandparents possibly. But then you do have a very small portion of that population that come from what society would deem normal,
Okay.
Sustainable family households, and they wanted to experiment, and the experimentation took over into now an abusive situation with
Okay.
drugs.
Now, in working with those populations, meaning the males and the females, and I know you had to do a lot of work in rebuilding the bridges between the family members, the parents, and the children, after
Yes.
possibly some trust was broken because this particular child had some substance abuse issues. There may have been theft involved, there may have been reincarceration, whatever the case may have been. How did you work with the families in rebuilding those relationships? Because we talked about communication, but what about that trust factor that goes both ways for children and for parents?
And it becomes a double-edged sword
Okay.
because it becomes very difficult. A lot of times you'll find in those populations, in those settings, that the parents, by that point, the level of involvement when I was working with these adolescents, is null. They're not really, they're done with the situation. They're done with the child's behavior, and it becomes very hard to engage. Now, you do have some parents that are there and want to engage, and communication becomes the barrier because something has happened to the child that the child believes the mother or the father has done them wrong, and the parent may not have been open, even though they're requesting help. They may still not be open to change.
Alright.
They may need to say, I'm sorry, and haven't been able to forgive themselves in order to allow their child to forgive them.
Absolutely.
So, it becomes very difficult to work with the family portion of that therapy because there's a time where the family as a whole needs to come together and say, whatever our issues are, this is what they are. Let's be very open and honest about these issues so that we can move forward.
I also want to use that as a segue, not just working with youth that have substance abuse issues, but do you think that that would also be effective in bridging a family back together when there's been some level of trauma or tragedy or a loss of disconnect between my parents or me as a child? Would you also say that that whole, healing process, beginning with let's look where we went wrong and where can we make some, positive impact to improve our family situation as a unit?
Yes, yes. Family therapy is a wonderful thing if you're willing to work the process. You definitely have to be open. You have to be ready for the communication. You have to be ready to hear what your child has to say, and you have to be able to take that ownership.
Okay, great.
So, it has positive results when you're ready, when you're open, when the communication is being actually effective. It's being taken and it's being listened to.
Now, what can families do now in the household if they're not at the point where they need therapy? I know we talked a bit again about, I have to go back to the communication, spending time, with each child or as a family unit, doing things, maybe things that are cost effective. We know
Hmm.
times are
Hmm.
difficult at this point, but how can we begin to become dream builders as parents?
I think the number one thing that parents need to do is get involved. They
Okay.
need to be involved with their children. Understand, I was currently reading one of the Hunger Game books,
Okay.
and I was on a school trip with my daughter, who's in the fifth grade, and one of the dads turned to me and said, "Well, they say read what they read."
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, why not listen to the music that they listen to? Understand the lyrics that are being put in your
Even if
childhood.
you don't want to really hear it, you may want to,
Well, if you
but you
don't
want
want
to
to hear it,
understand what's going on with your child. I understand that.
absolutely. Because if you don't want to hear it, then maybe your child shouldn't be listening either.
That's a good
So you
point.
definitely want to be involved. Be involved with your child. Provide them with some type of moral belief system.
Absolutely.
There's a wealth of resources in the community that a lot of people I don't think necessarily take advantage of, for the fear sometimes that a lot of times parents say, this is what goes on in my household.
Absolutely.
But there are seminars at our local libraries that where they talk about there's a wealth of training on bullying and cyberbullying. Your local schools, the elementary schools, the high schools, the middle schools are constantly having meetings about what's going on with children in today's society. Of course, you have the Burlington County Community Action Program that provide a wealth of service, especially for women and children, but they also provide parenting classes as well.
Are those in each county? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure that I know for a fact in Burlington County we have that
Okay.
program. There are in each county. If you go to your Board of Social Services, they offer parenting classes
Okay.
as well. And the Red Cross
Right.
offers babysitting
And a lot of
classes.
these services are free.
A lot of the services are free.
Absolutely.
Churches.
Absolutely. As well as important to be connected to your community in a lot of different ways to get support for parenting if you don't know some of the do's and don'ts in reference to positive and healthy parenting, as we've been discussing with Ms. Clara Hart. As you can see, she shared a lot of information and being an effective parent in reference to working with children and also with teenagers from different perspectives. If you have a child possibly that has some at-risk issues, there is support in all communities across the state of New Jersey.
Absolutely.
And we'll talk about some of those resources throughout our program today in reference to some of the services in different counties and what are some of the effective interventions in working with children and also building the bridges for parents and children as a family unit. At this time, I would like to welcome my second guest, and her name is Miss Lorraine Howard. And she also has a lot of experience in working with children and families and also helping with effective parenting. Welcome, Ms. Howard. How are you?
I'm great. Thank
Welcome
you for
to
having
Words
me.
to Action. You're welcome. You're welcome. I was talking with the prior host, Clara Hart, about parenting having a handbook. And I just want to get some of your input. If there was a handbook, what would be some of the things that you would think that would need to be a part of the content for effective parenting?
Okay, it's interesting you say that because there's actually a lot of different books out there
Okay.
that people, claim to be a handbook.
Okay.
And I like what Ms. Hart said. It's actually their guides, and I think there's the most positive ones is effective communication.
Okay.
There definitely needs to be open communication, especially today with the things that our children have to face, far more
Absolutely.
different than what we had to face as children. Very clear boundaries. One of the things that I see
Definitely.
often is that there's not clear boundaries for children, so they really don't know, what is okay or what's not okay in this world, and it
And
differs.
do you believe in reference to boundaries that those boundaries should be set very early in parenting? We can't wait till someone becomes 15 and we try to set boundaries. I always see that as a definitely set up for failure.
Yes.
Do you believe you have to start it early?
Yes. In my profession, a lot of times parents start too late.
Okay.
That's when they usually come for help when the kid is out of control or they don't feel like they can control the kid. You have to start really young,
Okay.
very young. And it's from, at least toddlers.
So like
Sometimes,
age 2, the
yes,
terrible twos?
those terrible
Okay.
twos. You see a lot of times, folks say, oh, they're just being a kid, and, they let them fall out and throw tantrums. And then, once they get older, you try to control that and curb that behavior, and it becomes very difficult because they haven't learned.
Okay. Like the boundaries and things of that
Exactly.
nature.
And they haven't learned how to, at 2, they're learning how to control their behavior. I want when I want, when
Absolutely.
I want it.
Immediate gratification.
Exactly. So it's for us as parents to teach them that sometimes you won't get what you want and that it's okay.
Absolutely.
And if you cry, it's okay as well. I don't need to, feed that instant gratification just so you can stop crying. And
Right.
then the child learns that it's okay. I'm not always going to get what I want, and that it's okay. And they learn how to monitor their emotions.
Now, what type of populations do you work with? I know you work with families and children, but a little more specific about how you work with them, some of the interventions that have been effective and promoting positive parenting.
I've worked with a lot of different parents and
Okay.
children. I've worked with adolescents in substance abuse, just like your previous
Okay.
host. I've worked with young women,
Okay.
ages 18 to about 24. And my favorite population, though,
Okay.
is adolescents across the board.
Across the board.
Those that you might, have problems or having issues in school.
Okay.
Sometimes they are coming into the system, but not even just those that are in the system. Some where parents are just saying, I need a little help. So I work with different programs like the YAP program,
Okay.
Youth Advocacy Program
Absolutely.
in Camden. So I have a lot of different experiences.
And what
across
would
the
be
board.
one of your success stories in working with families and parents? Can you think of anything that was successful? And it was a long road, I'm sure, but some of the things that were put in place and working with the child and also the parents as a unit to help rebuild that family.
Well, fortunately, I've had a lot of success stories, which is great,
Okay.
and
Okay.
it has not.
Well,
So
great. That's great.
yes, but I would say overall, the best success stories are when you have that separation of parent and child, whether it be mother or father
Okay.
and that child, and the child is feeling lonely, feeling like their parent doesn't understand. They're falling into a lot of peer pressure type things
Absolutely.
like drug using, gang activity, looking for that love
Okay.
that they feel like they're not getting from their parents, and then the parents feeling like I don't know how to communicate to my child,
Okay.
especially in today's world. When you have children, they want to wear their pants sagging, some of the music that they're listening to, and a lot of the choices that they are making today, it becomes very difficult to say, I don't know how to reach my child. And to be able to bring them into a room
Okay.
where you're the mediator to help bridge that communication gap. I think a lot of times it just comes from being able to sometimes sit back, just listen, and and then we go from there. So it's an awesome thing when you have a parent and a child who's able to bridge that
So that
communication gap.
reunification is important, and that's that part we're trying to, capitalize tonight, talking about, being dream builders, making sure that it's a unit where it's functioning in a very healthy manner and not dysfunction. I mean, all families, no matter, whatever the status is, we have some level of dysfunction, but how do we make sure that it's not out of control?
Yeah.
So saying that, and speaking with our first guest, talked about the communication as part of the foundation. And you're saying also not just communicating one way, but also being able to listen.
Yes.
Listen to what your child has to say, and also having the child be able to listen to what the parent has to say. It has to go both ways. Communication across, communication up and down, and it doesn't stop at that first session or when we first go over a barrier. It has to be ongoing.
Yes.
Is that what you find?
Very much so. Very ongoing. It's interesting, though, the article that you guys had posted with Spike Lee when he was talking about parents who he thought were dream killers. They were the biggest dream killers. And I think a lot of that really has to do with communication. It's interesting because I was sharing it with one of my staff, and they were
Okay.
saying how their child, he's an older gentleman, so his child's around 30 something. His grandchild said he wanted to be, and I can't exactly remember the profession, but he wanted to be something like a cop.
Okay.
And the mother jumped up and said, "No, you're not going to be a cop. You're going to be just totally
Okay.
felt like he crushed that child's dream." And I think sometimes it's not on purpose, but we want the best for our children. And he talked about his grandmother who supported him in going to film school.
Right.
And today, with the way
You see success.
tuition is,
Yes.
it's really hard. But when I read that, I thought about something I saw on Mother's Day, and that was Jada Pinkett with her mother and her daughter, and they did something called the Red Table to start that communication
Tell me
within
more
their
about
own
that.
family.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, what she did was she decided to have what she called a red table. And her daughter, Willow, and her mother and herself, they decided to come together and start that communication to kind of bridge those generation
Oh,
gaps.
that's beautiful.
It was awesome. And one of the things that she talked about was her mother struggled for a really long time with how she raised Jada, how she felt like, she wasn't a good parent because of some of the negative things that were going on growing up. And Jada talked about to her mother, explaining to her mom that experience meant something for her. So she shared that she finished school. And she called her mother up and she said, "Mom, I'm going to law school, or I'm going to California for acting."
Wow.
And her mother said, "Well, I guess we're packing our bags and going to California."
And that's a dream building moment for sure. But also, like you pointed out, starting that communication amongst and between three generations, that's important.
Yes.
We talked about with our first guest about the generational parenting approach. And also, I know in talking with colleagues or working with other families, it does start very early on. If my grandmother possibly was in an abusive family situation, then my mother possibly, and then also me as a granddaughter and or one of my siblings would possibly experience some of those same things. So it's important to start that communication early so that we can break down some of the barriers in relation to some of the ineffective parenting that we've been exposed to. So I'm glad that's a great point. And that's something maybe that doesn't cost money. We can start that level of communication at any time within our household. It doesn't have to be with females, but it also can be with males. I was talking with one of my other colleagues, and we talked about sometimes the males in the household feel a little different about their parenting experience and being raised. They feel sometimes that the females in the household get a better experience, they get a lot more attention, a lot more nurturing, and a lot more coddling. So what do you think about, what are your thoughts on that, males versus females in the household? I know you work with different kind of families. I know you have a daughter. You may not have had the male rearing experience, but have you heard some of those concerns for some of your boys that you've worked with professionally?
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think the biggest piece of that, it's culturally dependent on what the different cultures are. In some cultures, they feel like girls, you communicate more, you have to coddle them a little bit more, they're more sensitive. Boys, we have that old adage, boys will be boys, just get out there, and
Absolutely.
if they fall and scratch their knee, stop crying, get up, and it's okay. Girls, we tend to
hold close
to our heart. And I think that for a really long time, especially when we talk about communication, boys have been taught to hide their emotions, or at least, not express them as much as women. And I think that it has had a negative impact on some males, especially the males that I see in my profession, because a lot of times they say they don't know how to express their feelings. They don't have someone that they feel that they can talk to. So now they're in a professional setting and I'm expecting them to share with me how they're feeling. It's difficult. So
Absolutely.
as a professional, a lot of times we have to start from the beginning, like even showing them how we have the feelings chart, so we can begin to teach them exactly how to communicate what it is that they're feeling, what does that mean, and that it's actually okay to
So you're
have
saying
those
the
feelings.
initial part of the process is the identification of what I'm actually feeling. Am I
Yes.
feeling happy? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling mad, angry, and frustrated? But also not just identifying it, but also what does it look like? What does it look like to be mad versus
Yes.
frustrated? So you're saying that a lot of the basic work that you do is to get them to identify those feelings.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And we literally have to start there. We have to start from the beginning, teach them how to identify, how to recognize, and not only for themselves, but from other people. Because a lot of times their perception of what someone else may be giving off is incorrect. It's
Okay.
a little cloudy because they haven't had those experiences in their own households, you know,
Absolutely.
and how to determine, okay, what's going on today? Is mom or dad mad? Are they frustrated? Because as a boy, I need to go and figure it out because I'm strong. I'm
Okay.
strong enough.
Okay. I just want to remind the audience we're watching Words to Action, and we're trying to find solutions to parenting, effective parenting, to make sure that we strengthen our community as a family unit, and also demonstrating how we can impact our youth having a positive life experience, not just outside of their household, but also in the household. And like I said, we have 3 special guests, and soon we'll be joined by our 3rd guest. I'm going to talk a little bit more with Ms. Howard in reference to, if you had something else to suggest in reference to parenting, what would be your last word that you want to say? What makes parenting or parents more effective in their job?
I think the biggest thing is we have to start inside our homes. We have to get out of the mentality, no one else can say anything to my child. I can do this alone. I think it's very important that they ask for help. And
Absolutely.
before it becomes a problem. And it's okay because, like we said, there's no real map or plan for parenting. And I believe in the saying that it takes a village to raise a child, and
Absolutely.
we need to be able to look outside of ourselves. And I think that's number one. Before we can even go to the systems and, you know, different programs, we have to change our mentality and how we think of parenting so that we could be more successful.
Well, great. Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
having you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, my 3rd guest that I would like to bring onto the show, Words to Action, is Ms. Cher McCall. And Ms. Cher McCall has a lot of experience, like my prior guest, in working with youth and families. And we're going to talk a little bit about her experience in working with youth and families, and also some of the resources that you may be aware of. Like I said, we are solution-oriented here. We want to make sure that our audience gets more positive ways to become more effective parents. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great, great. We talked about a couple of different things. I just want to kind of bring you into the loop. We talked about, is parenting generational? We had a couple of different perspectives in relation to that we have to start that communication early with our children.
Absolutely.
Making sure that they have healthy tools, and not only just making decisions, but making good decisions.
Right.
If I wanted to just, ask you about parenting, what do you think makes an effective parent?
I think what makes an effective parent is you knowing your child.
Okay.
I think you have to study your child. Just like you study any one of your professions, I think that you have to study your own child. You have to know what their likes are, what their needs are, because I think one of your prior guests also said it, what works for your child may not necessarily work for my child. And what works for your child at that particular time may not work for my child. So I think knowing your parent, knowing your child makes you an effective parent.
So we're talking about having that relationship, or not even just a relationship. It's important that we have a rapport with our child, that we can have that communication. We also talked about different types of parenting styles, authoritative, where you have that open communication, everything becomes a teachable moment, versus authoritarian, where that parent is a disciplinarian, my way or the highway. And we talked about the differences in those parenting styles. What do you think is one of the most effective parenting styles?
I think any parent knows that as many resources as you can pull in to raise your child is the best resource. So I think sticking to one particular parenting style is not effective at all. I think that one of your prior guests also said it, is that you have to know your child enough to know at this phase of their development is when I should be implementing this type of parenting style. At this particular time, and what they're struggling with is what you should be implementing with your child at that particular time.
So you're saying, as having the relationship with your child, also knowing the differences in developmental periods.
Absolutely.
Because what a child may need at 2 versus 5 versus the teenage years, and also as a young adult, they all differentiate in reference to how you
Absolutely.
need to have
And
a
what my
relationship.
child needs at 2. What my
Okay.
child needs at 2 and 10 is very different from what your child may need at 2 and 10. You know, my child may be a very easygoing child at 10 years old, and you may not have to be that authoritative parent at that
Okay.
time. Where my child, you know, they may be all over the place and wild and doing what they want to do. So you may have to step up and kind of put your foot down and say, no, this is what we need to do at this particular time.
Okay.
So
I also want to tap into some of your professional experience. I know you've done a lot of work and working with females, gender-specific programming, enhancing their experience. Can you talk a little bit about possibly how parenting experiences differ for females in relation to maybe some of your teenage young girls that you were working with and they feel as though they want to become a parent, but what are some of the things that you had to talk with them about in order for them, when they were of age or having the ability to have a child, what would be effective for them? Some of the mindsets that you possibly came encounter with that you possibly had to work with enhancing.
I think sometimes at the adolescent years, when a girl speaks of wanting to be a parent at that stage, they often talk about wanting to have the love from that child.
Okay.
And that unconditional love may be something they haven't experienced from their own parents. However, when you start to talk to them about resources and how you're going to raise that child, what you didn't get and what you are able to provide for that child at that particular stage in your life, you start to kind of reframe their belief systems and help them to understand that maybe this is not the particular time to have a child. Maybe this is not the particular time. You don't have all the resources that you need. Love is not always enough sometimes, and that you need to bring in more resources to help you raise that child. Now, and when you talk about gender specific, I think that every child needs to be validated.
Okay.
Whether boy or girl, they need to be validated. When you talk about what their dreams and their goals are, you're not killing their dreams. You're validating what their wants and their needs are, and they're always ever changing. So understanding what that child is going through at that moment, and you have to be a researcher. You have to be a child researcher in your own child at that particular time to know what their needs are.
Now, do you believe, like our previous guest stated, that it takes a village to raise a child? Do you
Yes.
believe in that old adage? Well, it's not an old adage, but it's an adage that kind of was here for a long period of time, and then we kind of see it taper off. When we see a lot of things impact the community, sometimes things change, and people just want to just take care of their unit, but not looking at the whole community as something that I need to be involved with.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts on
I
that?
think anytime you isolate yourself from anything, you rob yourself of a human experience.
Okay.
And that human experience is being able to say that I understand, or be able to hold somebody's hand and say, I understand what you're going through. I learned a lot from my social circle, from my mother, my aunts, to say, okay, this is what I went through, and these are some of the things that we went through, and this is what's working for me, this is what didn't work for me. And it kind of helped you say that, okay, there is a light at this parental tunnel, and I know that I can make it through, so I'm going to continue to work towards those goals. And definitely a village and a whole group of support system helps you get through those times.
Now let's talk about building relationships between schools and parents and families.
Yes.
I know sometimes in my experience that's a really difficult thing for some parents to do because they don't feel comfortable going into the school community. They don't feel, possibly they may feel intimidated, by all the things that happen in the school environment, even though the school reaches out to communities or to different parents. They have different activities. They have school board meetings. They have, parenting meetings. So how could parents better enhance the relationship with their child's school?
I think being in constant email and communication with your teachers, I'm like that now with my 13-year-old son, and always reaching out to guidance counselors, teachers, and principals, and putting a face to the name of that child. Because once they know, okay, we know Miss McCall is going to be here, we know that his parents are going to show up all the time. Constantly being in contact with your child's resources that they have at the school helps to also bridge that village that you're looking for with your child's academic career.
So what you're saying is the village just doesn't stop at the community, it also bridges to the school environment as well.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot of different players that are involved in this village. I just want to remind people we're watching Words to Action, and like I said, we're solution oriented, and hopefully we're giving you vital information to become dream builders for your children. Once again, I wanted to also talk about the issue of what are some of the the breakdowns in the communities? What are some of the breakdowns? What are some of the things that you're seeing of why parents aren't connecting with their children the way they should be? What are some of the barriers?
I think sometimes people get stuck with the tried and the true. I think, oh, my parents did it, so I need to do it.
Okay.
Oh, this is the way it's always been done, so this is how we need to do it now. And that's not always necessarily the truth. You have to realize that the era that your child is growing up in now, the social influences that your child has right now, and say, okay, what are the needs of my child in this day and age?
Okay.
Because even if you have a child, in the 90s and you have a child in the 2000s, there's this whole social media era that's been popping up recently to say that, okay, how are you going to be able to communicate to your child with all these other outside influences? So what was okay when I was growing up, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have the social medias.
We had kickball in the street.
We had kickball in the street. We were jumping rope and playing double dutch. So back in, that was going on back in our days. Now everybody, I have my niece and her friend are sitting in the living room and they're Facebooking and texting, but they're talking to each other.
Absolutely.
But there's no words that are being exchanged. And I thought that was just the silence in the room was disheartening for me, because I'm saying, where's the art of communication?
Absolutely.
Is gone. Nobody knows how to the spoken language is pretty much gone nowadays. Everything is typed, everything is scripted. And I think that is a big deficit for our children these days.
So we talked about communication earlier. The way that we communicate has to change.
Yes.
In reference to, like you're saying, Facebooking, IM messaging, whatever the case may be, technology is a positive thing, but it also may contribute to the lack of communication that we have as a family unit.
Yes.
So in reference to that, how do we get through that? Is it something as a parent that we need to monitor more? Is it something that we need to be involved in? Do we need to have scheduled time where our children can be involved in Facebooking and IMing? What are some of the interventions that we can put in place to minimize the time doing that, but also knowing that they have to be connected to a digital world? How do we balance the two of those issues?
I think my mother said it best, is that I think a lot of times we don't realize that all of these devices have an off button.
Okay.
And I think that we think that the TV has to always be on and the cell phones have to always be on. It doesn't have to be on. There's an off button, and there's a time and a place where you have to say, no, for this hour, guess what? It's just me and you.
Okay.
We're going to communicate what's going on with you in your day. And it starts from the womb.
Right.
It starts from, your child being little and they come home and you sit for that half hour or 45 minutes before they go to bed and say, what happened? Well, little Johnny stole my lollipop today. and right now it's little Johnny stealing your lollipop, but at 15 it's going to be, this girl's talking about me, or this girl is hurting me, and next is going to be my relationship with my husband. So in order for you to open, and I say the art of communication, okay, because you can say anything you want at any time, but it's how you communicate, how you nurture, and how you validate that child's feelings and that child's emotions and that child's experience. And because you may be resilient to some things, but your child may not be as resilient to some of the things that are going on in today's society. So you have to be able to validate that child's life experiences at that particular moment. And you need to turn it off. Turn it off to have that quality
time, to be able to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Just take the plug out.
It's unplug
okay.
It. Unplug
okay.
It. It's okay.
And you think that it's important that families, we know, like I said, technology is important, but like you just stated very eloquently, making sure that we monitor it, we're on top of it, mm-hmm, and it doesn't take over how we communicate and interact as a family.
And even process it with your child.
Okay.
You can process what's going on Facebook. Well, and even ask them what it means. I know, and talking with some of the clients that I work with are all teenage girls, they look at me like I'm crazy, but I ask them, well, what does that mean? What does this mean? And what does that mean? Translate that, and it opens up a dialogue for communication.
Right. Okay. And if you had to describe what would be, say, a dream builder situation, what would that be? If you could describe that.
A dream builder situation. I think, earlier you were talking about, the handbook and what goes in the handbook. And I think that every parent needs a journal, and that's your handbook for your child. And it's documenting your child's life experience and going over that so that you can continue to help build your child and build their development in every stage that they're going through. Because if you don't know your child, you're not going to know when to say what you're supposed to say, how you're supposed to say it, and when is the right time to interject that parenting style, whether you should be mowing it out and saying, okay, my kid can't handle this particular situation at this time. My kid can't really deal with this particular. So I need to kind of smooth it out. Or, you know what, he needs to fall.
Right.
He
And,
needs to
and you know
fall.
what, in my experience, my professional experience, we can have 3 kids in a household,
Mhm.
and each kid's experience is totally different.
Yes.
And even though parents will say, well, I parented all 3 of my kids the same, I can't understand why one of my kids thinks that possibly I wasn't there enough, I wasn't supportive enough, or the other kid got more of I'll say, more treatment in a positive way, and I felt as though, mom or dad, whoever the parent situation may be, didn't pay enough attention to me.
Right.
Have you heard anything like that in your
Yes,
professional experience?
Yes. I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to make the point of saying that everybody's wired differently.
Absolutely.
Everybody's absolutely wired differently. And as a parent, you beat yourself up so much about what you're doing, whether you did the right thing, and did I say the right thing, and did this influence my child? But everybody's wired differently, and you can do everything you can possibly do, and give every resource and pull every resource that you can to your child. But if that child is not wired to receive that information the way they need to receive it, they're not going to receive it, and they're not going to play it out in the way that you wish for them to play it out. I think knowing what your child, and talking about their dream, and knowing what they want from their lives, and I think I heard you earlier talking about, what really kills their dreams is we have our own set of things of what we want. Of course we want our kids to be doctors or lawyers or whatever we want them to be, but what do they want to be?
Absolutely.
What do they want to be? And hearing and having that ear to be open to hear what they want. So yes, you do have to be open. You do have to listen in order for you to build their dreams to where.
Absolutely. And just another thing I want to ask you in reference to parents making mistakes. Are parents going to make mistakes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're going to make mistakes. And I think that's when the art of communication comes in. Because if you have that relationship with your child from the womb to say, you know what, mom messed up today, and it was a big mistake, and I'm sorry. And I think that makes you human to your child. Because I remember the first time I realized that my mother wasn't superhuman.
Right.
She's like,
Superwoman?
Mom's not perfect. And I looked at my mother like, what are you talking about? You're not perfect. You're my mother. So I think when you're able to say, I'm not perfect, I do make mistakes, but together we're going to work this problem out.
Absolutely. I think that's great. I think that having the child's experience as honest as possible. Of course we have to shield them from certain things, but I think that level of honesty also has them look at you with a level of integrity, even though they're not going to use that word.
Right.
But also they look at you and say, well, my mom or my dad, they were very honest with me and open, and we talked about things, and they didn't feel afraid to go and talk with you about anything. And that's the most important thing. That's what I see in working with young people, that they're afraid to talk to their parents. They're afraid to make a mistake. They're afraid to feel as though if they go talk to the parent about something that they did or something bad or whatever, that their parents are going to disown them, whatever the case may be. So sometimes they'll hide it from you, a lack of non-communication, and also begin to distance themselves from you. And this world sometimes is a beautiful world, but sometimes it's a difficult world to navigate for our children. And we don't want them to end up in the hands of the wrong situation or, with the wrong people, because they're looking for love in all the wrong places. And a lot of times we use that adage for females, but it's also the same for males. If I'm not getting something in the household, I'm going to go looking for it. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And when you talk about when you said about males and females, I think because we think boys, someone else said boys will be boys, and you just kind of throw them out there, throw a ball and make them catch it. They're okay. No, boys need validation, and they need love, and they need nurturing. And I think when you look at how you're rearing each child, whether boy or girl, you have to remember they may take different roles as they get older. Maybe your mother's role was a nurturer and a caretaker, and your father's role was the provider. But maybe your wife may not be the provider. May not be the nurturer. Maybe she's more of the provider, and the husband is the nurturer. So I think we have to make sure we're implementing those skills into our children, no matter what gender they are, because you never know what role you have to fill within your own relationship.
Right. And I think that kind of goes back to when you were saying that children are wired differently.
Yes.
And we never know if someone's going to be a nurturer or a provider. It doesn't matter their gender, whatever the case may be. They may be wired differently, but they relate to the world in a very nurturing or supportive kind of way.
Absolutely.
And we have to be, like you said, aware of that. And I think the point that you brought up, that journaling, about your child or your child's experiences are important, because those become reflective moments.
Yes.
And like I said before, you're watching Words to Action, and we're coming up with solutions so that everyone can be a dream builder. And if you have situations where you don't feel as though you're being an effective parent, there are resources out there. There's resources on the website. There's resources in each community across the state of New Jersey, no matter what state you may be in. There are resources to help you get the appropriate help in reference to being a more effective parent and also being a dream builder. So I want to say thank you,
Thank you.
McCall,
Thank you for having
all
me.
of your wisdom and your experience. And like I said, we're Words to Action, and we have hopefully provided you with some detailed information to enhance your parenting experience and also to become more effective and also to be a dream builder. Some of the key points that we talked about today are open and effective and honest communication. Also listen. It has to be more than a one-way conversation between your child and yourself. It has to be a situation where you're open to listening, maybe to things that may not even be that pleasant, but you're there to listen for your child so that you can guide your child the best way to navigate through this life. Also, setting boundaries early. The terrible two, setting those boundaries very early, and those boundaries may change as your child goes through the development perspective, meaning from age 2 all the way up to age 12 to age 20 as a young adult. There still needs to be boundaries set. They may look very differently, but what you're trying to do is enhance your child's experience in the world so they can make good decisions and also be responsible and productive citizens. Also, seek help. If you feel as though that you're having a difficult time parenting your child, make sure that you're able to tap into resources in your community, and not just your community, maybe even in your own family situation, where someone's doing a better job than you, or you just need to tweak something so that you can become more effective. Like we said earlier, it takes a village to raise a child. Get involved with the local churches. Get involved with, if you need therapy or any type of counseling for the family, there are resources out there that are sometimes at a nominal fee. Also, we talked about getting involved with the school environment, making sure that you have a relationship with your children's school, talking with guidance counselors, having a relationship with possibly the teachers, also monitoring your child's progress on a day-to-day. A lot of the school systems have online systems where you can tap into, so you have that involvement with your child. Also, we talked about generational support. As we talked about with Ms. Howard, we talked about the red table discussion, where you can bring your child at a discussion, at a red table, blue table, whatever the case may be. The most important thing is that you're having that discussion, maybe amongst different generations, mother, father, uncle, brother, sister, to talk about your experiences as a child. At the end of the day, we want you to be able to use some of these solutions that you've heard today on Words to Action. We really appreciate you being a listener and participating in our live webcast this evening, and hopefully you are a dream builder and not a dream killer. Thank you very much for being a part of our audience.